Good evening. I'm so happy that you're with us tonight on this Martin Luther King birthday day. I hope that you've had a nice weekend and that you found some ways today to celebrate the legacy of Dr. King. Lots of parades around our state today, events over the weekend, and that's gratifying. My guest and I today are going to talk about something very poignant, and that is whether or not Dr. King's dream is still achievable in the United States that we live in and know today. That's all on tonight's Hamilton Report. I know someone who was working today because their employer gave the employees the option of choosing either Dr. King's birthday or Columbus Day, not Indigenous Peoples Day, but in fact Columbus Day for holidays. And they voted to celebrate Columbus instead of Dr. King. I'm sorry for that employee and more sorry for the employer that they didn't recognize the importance of today. It is a national holiday, and many in our state I know had to work today because their employers feel much the same way. But it's been 60 years this year since Dr. King made history in the March on Washington with his I Have a Dream speech. One of the most inspiring speeches I've heard in my lifetime, and one I regularly listen to because of its importance to us even today. It is with great pleasure that I welcome to the Hamilton Report tonight a dear friend of all of us in Oklahoma for the valiant work that he does every day as a senator. And I'm very, very happy to welcome him back to the Hamilton Report, not his first time with us, but always welcome him for his expertise, his knowledge, his commitment, and most of all, I think, because of his heart. Welcome, Reverend Dr. George Young. I'm thrilled that you are with us, Senator Young. Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, today we celebrated parades in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and Bartlesville, a number of places around the state, recognizing Dr. King's accomplishments and his contributions, certainly not just to Black Americans, but to all Americans. I remember very, very young. I was 3 years old when he delivered his speech, and I watched it live on television. And even then, not knowing fully what he was saying, I recognized the importance of what he was doing. And as I've gotten older, it's a speech that I return to quite often. His writings, his sermons, his speeches continue to inspire me and direct my own work here at the Democratic Party, and I think more importantly, in my daily living. But I'm going to pose the overarching question first, and that is, given where we are as a country, perhaps divided more than we've been in generations, do you think it's still possible for us to achieve Dr. King's dream, the dream that he shared so eloquently?
Two things, Scott. Thank you so much for allowing me to be on and to share with you. And this is important and significant to me. And if you don't mind, let me just give a little context as to why this moment is important to me. This day is important to me, and you having me on. I will be 69 years old in a couple of months, in April, end of April. And you do the math. I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. Obviously, I was there in 1968 when Dr. King was assassinated, and lived in Memphis all of my childhood. And grew up in a southern town on the Mississippi River, lift that bell, tote that barge. So this is cotton, King cotton, all of that goes into it, which I think many folks have forgotten or moved past. And at my age, I feel sometimes, Scott, one of the last individuals around an age that came directly in contact with all of that. And so this is important to me. Every year it's important to me. Every day it is important to me. And to answer your question, I have two answers. One, hope springs eternal. Wherever there's a possibility, there is hope that that dream can be realized. And the other thing I would say is it is part of our very try to make the dream as he laid it out, to make that dream everyday existence. And I'm one of those folk who that is the driving force behind and exists. So that's my start. That's where I would answer that question.
Well, and that's a very good place to start, and that's a much more hopeful than I was counting on today. The theme at your church this year is "We press on," and that comes directly from Scripture.
Yes, sir.
We have to keep before our eyes the prize that is ours to achieve, and I don't. You have been really busy before the legislative session starts, and I don't know if you had a chance to watch any of the speaker hearings on the House last week. It was deplorable. I'll just say that. But one of the things that made me insane was some of the people who had the temerity to quote Dr. King in their nomination speeches for someone who could not live further away from the dream. I frankly, between you and me and our audience, I wanted to slap his name out of their mouths because it did not fit. It was it was very distasteful, and I thought, not only do you not understand who this man was and what he stood for, you don't even follow the teachings of the Christ that you so quickly raise up as your moniker is Christian. So I was really flummoxed by that. Some even went so far as to go back to Frederick Douglass, and I thought, wow, I don't know how much more pandering we can tolerate at this point. And I mentioned right before I brought you on that it's not just this speech; it's a number of his speeches, many of the sermons that he preached across the years, his writings, particularly those from a Birmingham jail. There is so much richness in there, so much rich material that can help us today. So when you are sitting as a senator in the capital of Oklahoma City, how do you introduce the level of kindness and inclusivity among a group of folks who so often just want to oppose one another?
Right. Sometimes that's not possible, Scott. So let's get that on the table. Sometimes it's not possible because I would think that most folks, and I don't have a problem with using myself. I'm probably a more moderate Democrat than most folk realize. And over the years, because of my background, I grew up in a situation where in Memphis, back in the 60s and early 70s, when I went from an all-black school from kindergarten to 8th grade to a predominantly white school from the last 4 years of high school, junior high and high school, 9th through 12th grade. And it taught me a lot, but my parents gave me and said, hey, you know what? You're as good as anyone, but you are not better than anyone. So you are equal. You're not above. You work for what you get. You earn the things that people give you. And so part of it is, again, your question about how I respond to this capital, the place where I have to come to those 4 months of the year and then other times for different things, is I think I still have to hold on to what I said. There is hope. But hope cannot get lost in misdeeds. You have to speak the truth. People like to say speak truth to power. I like to say speak truth to ignorance. And so a lot of folk
Mm.
are just ignorant. I'm not giving them an excuse. I'm just saying that you have some places in Oklahoma where there's not a lot of diversity. And so they don't quite understand the situations that I represent. I represent the largest African American population in the state legislature in Northeast Oklahoma City. And so there are issues that impact Northeast Oklahoma City that are much different from the Panhandle, Miami, Idabel, those places. And so I have to stand up for those things because people don't understand them, don't understand the things that I present as legislation or the responses I make to things that they say. That doesn't give them the excuse not to listen. If they're going to govern the state, they need to hear the perspectives of individuals within that state that differs from those. I have to listen to the craziness. I'm just telling you what I think it is, the craziness that I have to listen to very often. And so I think they need to listen and hear what I have to say. And I think that's what you just described with the hearings that we've just gone through for the speaker. We are in a current environment where logic and reasonableness has taken a back seat, and we've got to bring that back. You can remember, Scotty, you're not quite as old as I am, but you can remember that once upon a time, we entrusted folk who had been elected. We entrusted folk who had positions of authority and influence to try at least to do what's right. We know they didn't, but they were not brazen and bold enough to do things that were just anti-community, anti-different people. I was raised up in a time where it was very difficult for me to watch TV and not see instances where the African-American population was degraded. It was, but you lived through that. And I lived through a period where I saw that was broken to some degree. And the African-American population were raised up because of individuals like Dr. King. And let me add this very quickly. When I hear someone quote, particularly from in that Senate chamber that I sit in, when I hear someone quote Dr. King, really it turns my stomach because, when Dr. King was alive, he was not as popular as he is now. You can go to any town in America, there's a Martin Luther King Avenue. That was not so. A friend of mine was telling me his approval ratings were worse than President Biden's now, so he was not the person that they want to quote. He would have been someone they disdained. And so I hold that for my first point in our conversation, that things have changed. I know it seems difficult right now, but things have changed. Things have improved. The fact that I'm sitting in that chamber with one other African-American out of 48 state senators in Oklahoma, things have changed. Things have progressed a bit. So we have to grab hold of that. But obviously, you know me well enough to know that I'm not resting with that, and probably more so than anyone else. I wait across the time. I do the same thing. I have, complaints about how they handle business, but we've got to keep, and as Jesse Jackson said, people laugh at it, but we've got to keep hope alive. We cannot burn it down. If we do, we won't have anything to work with. That makes it difficult when you take the alternative of not burning it down, which sometimes I think is the best way to do it, but I know it's not going to happen. You have to work through these difficult periods.
Well, you're absolutely right. I grew up and was entering junior high school the first year that forced integration was a part of Oklahoma City public education. And I remember parents forming picket lines and lined up on the streets, honk if you hate busing, all of the rhetoric. And yet, as a result of that one thing, my life is so much better because I got to learn about people that otherwise I wouldn't have. I had people in my home that otherwise I never would have had reason to invite into my home. And so while we can't legislate morality, we can't legislate a change of heart, we can change hearts and minds one person at a time. And I think that that's really what you're getting at. As long as we do keep hope alive, then we have a chance to at least have a conversation with people. Let's stay with education for a moment. One of the things that concerns me most about this whole school voucher thing is that you if it depending on how the thing lays out, it could be that you could be selecting a school where every kid in that school looks just like your kid, doing away with the notion of diversity and inclusion. And so I don't want us wandering back in history like that. And are those things that ever come up in the legislature? The not just the for or against school privatization, but the ramifications long term of what that could mean in a negative way to our children.
It is, Scott. It's already occurring. Let's get that straight right now. And this idea, I think part of what we have to look at is, again, I say this quite often because I see it and I think it's the base of it. There's been a change in culture. There's been a change in the atmosphere. There's been a change in the environment in which we operate, in which we try to make things happen from 1968 when Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, and now there's been a change. There was immediately during that period, the 60s and 70s, people were beginning to try and understand why there was so much upheaval and why people were saying, we want the opportunities to vote. We want equality of opportunity like you have. And people were beginning to take note of that. But with progress, now that you got this turn to, okay, that's enough. I'm being left out. I'm being ignored. And we've never gotten to a point of equality when now you want to stop the work that's needful. And I'll give you the best example. You mentioned education. If you look at educational attainment and the results of education, even just go back to last school semester, if you could get those statistics, you see, but there are some very difficult statistics that came out, particularly in my district and my schools, that were lower than many other school districts. And it's not because those because of this argument that you lifted, this idea of taking school vouchers, which is literally taking funds out of the public education system,
yes,
and giving it to private schools by very virtue that the virtue of the fact that you want to take your child out and put in a private school, you admit at that point that I want to pay for that, and you relieve the state of that responsibility. But now you want to take your kid out of public education and take the money with it to take it to private schools. That hurts every school that is left on the regular school basis. And you are relieving funds. Listen, if you had a home and there were 5 people in the home and you brought the paycheck in, everybody said, well, I don't like how you're doing things. Give me my share and I'm going to go. You couldn't pay the mortgage. And so it's not craziness what I'm saying. It's legitimate, logical sense that those things hurt. If you want to go to private school, I'm all for that. I'm all for that. You can give many of the people in my district vouchers, and those vouchers would sit on the dining room table forever because there are too many other disparative kinds of things that would prevent them. Childcare, transportation, the involvement in those schools and the cost of that. It's so many things that my parents from being able to even access that, which go back to Dr. King this day that we celebrate. And all Dr. King was saying, hey, if you want America, all of America, if you want to change the educational system, put your funding where the education system is at most risk. And I can take you to those schools in Northeast Oklahoma City that are being ignored. I'm not lowering the expectations of my schools in my district. I'm raising that. I'm saying to you, my kids are performing at a level that is unbelievable when you look at the situation that they come from and what they are placed in. And so I'm very proud of all my schools, Douglas, Northeast, Star Spencer, all of those schools, Harding, but they would be doing better if you had the resources instead instead of relieving them of resources, adding resources. And so, no, I still have hope. I think that people are hearing the message that let's place our funding where it is needful and necessary. Dr. King was very high on health issues. I say today, we want to do health issues and the disparities that exist. We know, show you disparities. I have OU Health Science Center in the middle of my district, yet their impact on health in the zip codes right around them is minimal or nil. And so you got to start looking at it. And I said, I try my best to talk with them about what can you do to come outside of your door. You don't have to go far. Just walk across the street and start a clinic right there. And you would be doing some good. So I think we're missing, there has been a change in the environment and culture that people are saying collateral damage is okay. And I'm telling you, it is not. We need all hands on deck, and we're losing a large that, they'll be all right if you force them to do better. No, they won't be all right because they deserve better. And so but I am still hopeful. I'm still working toward that. But it is very difficult in this present environment, Scott, to do and to see what you're talking about become reality. Dr. Dream. Quickly say this last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, is a book that everyone ought to read because he stops and analyzes the work he's done. The 1968 Civil Rights Voting Act, all of those things have taken place. They've made progress in his life. Dr. King has seen things that have moved the needle. He's seen things but his last book, he takes off and goes, I think, to the Bahamas and hides away for a while to write this book so he's not disturbed. And you read it, and you hear the despair, even with all of the victories he's had, you hear the despair because he sees where we are and that we're not there yet. And people are trying to quit already and saying, that's enough. And to this day, I think it's still the title we ought to use. Where do we go from here? Where are we right now? A community where we all come together and make America strong, make America greater, make America better for everyone? Or do we devolve into chaos of trying to say, no, you got more than I do, and I'm not going to help. Matter of fact, I'm going to take more from you and make it where it is more difficult and all of the collateral damage, which we will pay for as a nation on down the road. So that's part of my stance on it.
Well, there is no question that minority communities are impacted in many ways. Food deserts among them, where there is no supermarket. There are dollar stores that fill some gaps. And so my point is that we do still have so much work to do. And I'm glad that you opened this program the way you did, because if each one of us can summon even a little bit of hope and believe in a brighter day and work toward that, you make such great sense there. And it's not a complicated formula. Gosh, I'm really glad that you opened that way, because it rearranged my thinking. When I asked you to be on this evening, I was pretty much at a place of despair given what I see around me today. And so I appreciate the words of hope that you are imparting. I want to spend the last few minutes of this broadcast actually taking a look at Dr. King's speech, and we'll do that in a moment. But give just very, very simply, how does each one of us grab a little bit of hope to keep us moving forward?
Yeah. I think part of that grabbing a little bit of hope is grabbing a little bit of the possibility of how life can be. If you really want to talk about Dr. King, he provided the impetus for particularly, but not just African Americans, to say there is some hope. There is his words. I just got to tell you, but when my mother called me to the back door on that April day in 1968 as a 13-year-old out on the field playing basketball like I normally do it, my mother called me to the back door of our house, and tears were running down her eyes. And she said to me, Dr. King, in Memphis, not too far from where we live. Dr. King has been downtown Memphis. I was in Memphis.
George, you froze there for a minute, and I'm going to ask you to pick up where you said when she called you to the back door, she had tears running down her face. That's the last thing I heard clearly.
Tears.
Friends, I apologize for a technical issue that has caused us not to hear the rest of that. I assure you we will bring George back to share that last bit of hope with us, because I think it's something that we need reminded of over and over again. But before we leave, let's take a look at a portion of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
I'm happy to say that Senator Young has returned to join us. Before I let you finish what you were saying, I just want to say something that stood out to me. Honestly, I probably have watched that speech a couple hundred times, But it wasn't until today that I noticed something very interesting, and that is that within that crowd, listening to that speech today, it wasn't just black folks. It was black and white and young and old and male and female gathered together for freedom.
Right.
And that's hopeful to me, George.
It is. He gave hope. That's Scott. That's what I think we miss. We love to talk about Dr. King's stance and the things he said, but if you looked at that crowd, and I've seen that I have numerous times, innumerable times, and I looked at that crowd, and the thing that jumped out at me was those individuals in that crowd were hopeful. They were hopeful. They were grabbing hold of something that they said, this can be, this is possible. And that's still what we need to generate. What he was talking about is possible. I don't care what happens. 1775, trying to change the way history is taught in the Oklahoma schools. It's still hopeful. We can still fight through. We still fight through. We still press on no matter what occurs. It is our responsibility to keep hope alive. It is that. You saw it in that crowd. You can imagine what those people were going through, the lives they were living during that time. I was part of that. I saw my mother and father strive to try to do what was right, to make it in an environment that held them down. Yet they continued to do that so that I would have a chance to do what I'm doing today. But I don't have to deal with what they had to deal with. I got a whole nother problem. But it's my responsibility to generate the kind of hope that he generated to those folk in that crowd. They believed that moment, that kind of a miracle was possible. We've got to get back to that.
And I'm going to tell you something. As much as your parents gave you hope and you're giving hope to all of us, you've especially given hope to me today. So I'm so thankful that you could spend some time with us this evening. Your words, your actions, your commitment to the people of Oklahoma, and even more, the powerful, powerful notion of the hope that we can be a country united for all of its people. That's something I'm going to hang on to this year. And for that, I give you all thanks and appreciation. Senator George Young, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Well, friends, we are completely out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us on this holiday weekend. I hope that you will want to share this broadcast, because the more people that hear what we are thinking, what we are working toward, then perhaps we might just change one more heart or one more mind. I'm looking forward to seeing you again next Monday right here at 6:30. And until then, please take good care of yourself. On behalf of all of us at the Oklahoma Democratic Party, I'm Scott J. Hamilton, thanking you for joining us. Good night.